Okay.
We got a lot of good questions for everyone today.
Okay.
Alrighty. Beautiful. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Hannah, and we also got
Hamza Ewing.
Oh, okay.
Hamza, and we will be co-hosting today's discussion, and we are the two leads on the book club project with CAIR Social Justice Book Club. So first of all, we want to welcome all of you and also commend and thank all of you for being a part of this book club. It takes a lot to be active in the conversation surrounding justice and actually do something about it. So educating ourselves by reading from these incredible authors is one of the main ways that we have to start in order to ensure that justice prevails as part of our deen and our teachings. So first of all, thanks for joining. And we're really excited to be here. CAIR is really excited to be spearheading this project. And of course, we're happy to have you. So a little bit about myself and then a little bit about Hamza. We are both interns with CAIR, and I work in community engagement. Hamza?
I work in the interfaith relations track.
Yep, and so we're your contacts for any questions you have regarding this project. So without further ado, let's get into the ground rules and like what's happening today. So basically, Hamza and I have gathered a lot of questions surrounding this book, and what we want is a lively discussion. So everyone, please feel free to chime in with any additions. Of course, be respectful of the person speaking, allow them to engage in that space. But at the same time, we want you all to feed off of one another's ideas and to add from anything you've learned, and also to ask questions, because that's part of this club, is that we want to grow with what everyone else is sharing. So we will be asking questions, and please feel free to chime in, answer those questions. Don't make us wait like 30 seconds of silence before answering the question. Like, just go ahead, unmute yourself, answer the question, inshallah. And of course, Hamza and I will be here to facilitate the discussion, and it's going to be great. So what do you think, Hamza? Should we dive in?
Yeah, I think so. Just to clarify one point, this isn't a lecture, so I don't want you guys to see it that way. This really is an open discussion, and we just want to collaborate with all of you guys and hear everyone's opinion, because I think that's where the real juice is going to be, inshallah.
He said it great. He said it best. So that really leads us into our first question, which is, we're going to add someone in here. So actually, before we get into our first official question, how about we hear everyone's initial reactions to the book? So what was your initial reaction to reading How to Be an Anti-Racist? And Hamza and I can start so we can go ahead and get those juices flowing. For me personally, reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, it truly reframed my thinking, because I really did think in those two narratives of you are either racist or you're not racist. And I didn't realize it was a process of you have to be actively anti-racist, because the norm is racism, because in many ways we've internalized racism as a norm. So that framework really from the first chapter, I told Hamza this, I think the first chapter is the most powerful one because it sets the tone for that thinking. So Hamza, what about you?
Yeah. So leading into what you saying that the first chapter was so powerful and so impactful, I have to agree with you. I think the author does a really good job of bringing in his own personal stories and life experiences, and it makes it very personal for you. I don't know about everyone else, but I was really able to relate to a lot of his experiences, especially being an African American, living in the U.S. And another thing that really impacted me personally is I ended up spending a lot of time with self-reflection. Like Hannah said, you see it as either being a racist or not a racist, but many of the things he brings up, challenges those beliefs, and it kind of is very eye-opening, and it explores you to think of it in, at a deeper level. So that's what I really appreciate in the book.
For sure, Hamza. So the floor is yours, people. Don't make us wait 30 seconds now. Go ahead, chime in. What did you think, your initial reactions to the book? Oh, sister, I think you're muted.
I have to say that it was really eye-opening, that like, oh, it's not enough to say, oh, I'm not racist. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. So that was really eye-opening for me. So even though like whatever we say, whatever we talk about, whatever we'll be saying to people or interacting, it has to be really, it comes down to that. You are either you are or it is anti. It's not enough to say I'm not racist or I'm not racist. It's not enough.
For sure.
Perfect. That's really profound for me personally, because the way how I learned racism is, some people are taught that that Black people can't be racist, because if you actually look at the definition of racist, there has to be some sort of systematic oppression, right? But it was very eye-opening because it doesn't exclude anyone. You can't say like, oh, I'm not a racist, regardless of your ethnic background. It's like it opens the door for anyone to be a racist. And so it was a very challenge-provoking thought that he brought up. And it was very impactful the way how, I think that thought about it completely differently.
I also wanted to say that I was kind of, it was interesting to hear that like how people are not born with this. It's not the innate quality that somebody has it. You are not born with it. So it's something we have learned. It's a kind of learned behavior. So there is the way to kind of identify it and then you work from there. So there's something like comforting to know that it's not, not something that you cannot do or you cannot work on it. So it is there and you have to identify and then you work from there. So because nobody is born with it, according to the author here, nobody is born with that quality, it's like a tattoo, it's not like a tattoo. I mean.
Yeah. Like you learn it from society and then that becomes the norm. So it's a lot of unlearning for sure.
I think for me, jumping off what was said earlier, I actually remember in grad school, I like had an argument with somebody about how people of color can be racist. And he was very like, no, like as people of color, it's absolutely not possible for us to be racist. And for me, it was kind of like, well, within the Muslim community, like almost all of us are, a large percentage of us are people of color, and yet there's a lot of racism inside our community. So it was very much like it was kind of interesting to see like what I've been thinking sort of articulated and named in the book. And also I've been working in education for a long time. And so about 15 years now. And I think for me, it was very interesting to kind of start thinking about the school structures that we have are inherently racist. The practices that we have are inherently racist, and very come from a white normative perspective. So it's very interesting now to see like, well, how am I even though I've considered myself a student activist and a social advocate and a justice advocate, is there some way that I'm actually perpetuating racism in my school? Is there a way that we can actually actively combat it, instead of just saying, well, like we're not racist, like, we don't have that, we don't see color, like all our students are the same. And so I think it was, for me, it was just kind of interesting to start getting some thinking about that and reflecting.
I like it. Yeah. Okay, so feel free to add on to this. I'm going to pose the first question, but feel free to add your reactions to the book to our questions. And you kind of had a great segue into this, which is, how does the form of creating definitions in the book serve as something powerful? So identifying the term racist policies versus the system. A lot of people say the system's messed up, but we don't really identify what that is. But in the book, he says, no, I like the term racist policies because it points at exactly what the problem is. What power do you think that has in combating racism?
So I can start, Hannah.
Go ahead.
I was kind of reflecting on this question. And so the first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to look at the definition that the author kind of put for us or introduced to us in the book. And reading from my notes, racist policies are any policies through their actions or inaction are racially discriminating in a way which results in racial inequality between racial groups. And so I know that's very packed. So I wanna break that down a little bit. You know, especially the part, you know, racially discriminating. And according to the author in the book, it's actually okay to racially discriminate if the main objective is to provide racial equality, right? And he actually goes further to say that would actually be an anti-racist thing to do, right? So if two different races are on two different platforms, one is above the other, it's okay to racially discriminate if the purpose is to put them on an equal playing field, an equal playing ground.
Yeah, affirmative action, right, Hamza? Exactly. Affirmative action, yeah.
Exactly. And then pushing through, for me, this was very like eye-opening, where he said through their inactions or inactions, right? Because, you know, we look at a policy, right? And it, based on what the author is saying, it falls into two categories, right? So a policy is either like exacerbating the problem, right? Through some explicit, you know, writing that's, you know, explicitly discriminating against a certain race, right? But, you know, it also comes through inaction also, right? And it could be, for example, ignoring the problem at hand through the policy, right? And for me, that was very, very eye-opening. You know, that's also considered racist according to the author, right? Where you have a policy and, you know, it's ignoring the problem or, you know, any other things that are, you know, avoiding, you know, what the real problem is at hand and how that's actually considered racist, right? And so the policies that lawmakers make, right, they define the system with which you live in, right? And if these policies are racist in nature, then it will only continue to promote racial inequalities, right? Leading into my last point after thinking about this, racist policies, like Hannah was saying, are the roots of the problems of systematic racism, right? And even to go further, we can actually see capitalism as being somewhat racist, right? Because capitalism
very yes. Not even somewhat, Hamza. Exactly. I'm just saying.
Exactly. Because the capitalism with which we are living in today, it continues to keep the white rich and the black poor, and not even just the black, the minorities. SubhanAllah, I did some research. And according to the Statista Research Department, as of 2013, about 76% of US millionaires were white, right? And as of 2013, only 8% of US millionaires were black, you know? And there's many reasons why that is, right? But the questions we need to be asking ourselves is, you know, why is this a reality? And do people of color truly receive equal opportunities like everyone else? That's where I'll end it, inshallah.
Great additions, Hamza, to the conversation. Anyone else want to
add? I think what they're talking about, like how the racial policies are created to protect the people with that kind of mind. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of saying it's okay, go ahead and act in certain way because you're already protected by the government, by the policies that are out there. So kind of that was kind of interesting to know.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, I actually took a quote from the book. And the author was saying that racism, and actually I think I posted this on the WhatsApp.
Yeah, I had that on my like one of my sticky notes too. So I was like,
it was so powerful. It was so powerful that racism does not stem from ignorance or hate, but it's actually the self-interest of creating a racist power, you know, this racial hierarchy, and powerful economic, political, and cultural self-interest, right? And when you look at today's society, you know, it makes sense, you know, certain people are benefiting from this. So it's within their interest to promote these types of racism, you know, because it takes, I think, like a powerful person in order to realize that what they're doing is, although it's bringing themselves up, it's also debasing the foundation for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Really good points. I mean, at least I never thought about, and I didn't see through this new perspective. So it's really good point there.
And I think going back to your question about the definitions, it's sort of, you can't solve a problem if you can't name it. You know, and I think for a lot of years in the United States, like we've been seeing these issues, but we've never been able to as a society, like clearly name it or come to a common definition about what this is. And some people will call it color blindness, other people will call it, you know, equality, other people call it equity. Like, it's just so many different words for the same thing. And I think to be able to name it kind of, you know, allows you to try and actually figure out how to solve it, instead of it being something like so abstract or like, you know who, or something of the sort. You know, it's something that you can actually come across and combat actively if you know what it is.
It's a really, really good point.
Yeah.
Assalamualaikum. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Both will get a chance. Don't worry, everyone. Everyone's going to get a chance. Go ahead.
Sorry, are we talking a lot? So we're going to refrain now.
Same.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, to add to that point, that was a really good point, but it helps activists focus, essentially. And author made some really good points in that. One of the techniques to kind of stymie or delay the anti-racist movements are the kind of nonchalant or laissez-faire kind of, oh, I'm not a racist, even though really I either don't fight against racist policies or I'm kind of, maybe closet racist isn't the right word, but essentially it helps them hurt the anti-racist movement. And then another good point the author made was, and I kind of see this in the Muslim community as well, where we're sometimes not very effective in our efforts. So a lot of times we'll do demonstrations and we'll go out and we'll march and, you know, we'll have the chants and things, which are good because you want to raise awareness, but you kind of have to take it to the next level. So without definition and a clear path, clear guidance, you almost are kind of spinning your wheels and you're not affecting positive change on policy. So that's why I really, really liked how he focused on policies and a lot of the interconnected systems, especially like you guys mentioned in terms of capitalism and how that feeds into everything. So I think that was really important.
Definitely. Mariam, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. So my name is Mariam. I'm from California, San Diego. I'm studying social work at SCSU. I'm part of this group because I am studying social work and I really wanted to know, I am more interested in advocacy stuff. So I am very happy to read this book because it really provided me the foundation to understand issues within the society. For the about policies, I would say the author is talking about policies, which makes it very, very powerful. It's not that he is like ignoring individuals. We are learning a lot about what individuals are doing that should be considered to be racist. But he is talking about policies because policies can be challenged. And, you know, individuals, like, it's a personal, like, if I as an individual want to really, you know, which way do I want to go? But policies can be challenged. So people who can get engaged, who want to really actively advocate, they can go ahead and do that. That's why pointing out toward policies, I think, makes the idea very worth understanding.
Jazakallah khairan. Very powerful, very powerful. I think that's a really good point. So let's move on to the next question, inshallah. Does the idea of being anti-racist as defined in the book make you personally feel uncomfortable? I want to hear other people's opinions on that topic.
That's an excellent question, Hamza. I think, I'm not just saying that because we came up with it. I really think it's a good question because just to start off the conversation, you know, we heard from our book club members that it's not about just not being racist and just being okay with, oh, personally, I'm comfortable. I know I'm not a part of the problem because I'm not racist. But we have to understand that racism is a part of racist policies. It is a part of a larger moving vehicle that if we don't stop it, it's not going to stop and people will continue to suffer. So does it make me uncomfortable? I think in the beginning when it was framed in that way, I didn't feel uncomfortable, but I felt a little bit upset that I hadn't thought about it this way before. And I've always tried to be like, yeah, I'm committing my life's work to combating these forms of racism, but I never defined it in my brain in this way. So I felt frustrated that I hadn't thought about it before, but thankfully now that we have a framework, we can better be able to affect real change. And we'll talk about action steps at the end of the book club, but new people who haven't spoken yet, please, what do you think of this question? What about Huzaifa? Are you still on with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, what do you think of this question?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. Does the idea of being anti-racist as defined in the book make you uncomfortable?
It does not, because I feel like that's something that it's a hard truth that everyone needs to learn at the end of the day. Like, racism isn't just something that you say like, oh, okay, I'm fine with everybody. There's subconscious aspects of racism too that are very hard to, like, I would say, eradicate because they're so conditioned in like people's heads. So I feel like how the book stresses like actively being anti-racist, I feel like that definitely is an important aspect that everyone should participate in.
Excellent.
It does kind of make you think. I mean, even if it does not make you comfortable, it does make you think that, oh my God, this is what's happening and I didn't say something. Now it makes it compelled that you feel like, oh, I should, or I must. Like, I'm a teacher by profession, so I like work in the elementary school. So like we have all these kind of trainings and, like implicit bias and all this kind of thing, and how it plays the role, the systematic, racism, and how it affects all different students. So we learn something. It's nothing new. Like, say something when you see something, like, and if you don't say it, then that's when people become more encouraged and they talk about it and they treat people the way they want to. So if you see something, say something. That's the slogan.
Yeah, I can add something really small to this. But as referring to this question, I feel like it should make us feel uncomfortable. Zayfa was saying, like, it's a hard truth that we need to accept. But emphasis on the word hard. Hard is, it's not something easy to accept, but I think it's something that we never really have to accept. To go further than that, we have to accept it and then reflect on ourselves as individuals, right? Because unfortunately, and this is something that you like you were saying, sister, that it's not something that we grow with, but it's something that we kind of absorb from society. And all of us, in some shape or form, are at least a little bit racist, right? There's racism within every single one of us, and it's also within our Muslim communities. And people say that Islam does not preach racism. And while this is true, how do I say this? But Muslims are considered the least racist of people, but that doesn't mean that we can't be racist, right?
True.
And as Muslims, I think we just need to look within ourselves and see how we can break down these walls and work on dismantling the racism within our own heart.
Yeah, and I would say that as long as, because we all, at some level, at some point, have biases. We can't say that we don't. As long as we have those, I think it will make us uncomfortable. Because, okay, the author is saying that to believe in a racial hierarchy is to believe in a racist idea. Are we not, like, kind of identifying with some of those racial hierarchies? Are we, how much are we protected? So these are something that we have to accept and, as Hamza said, and reflect upon.
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam. So I think that some things that, especially we as a Muslim community, knowing that there is like, you know, racism within our community, I think there, when in the beginning chapters, when he was talking about how even within, like, for example, there's the ethnic racism, right, that exists, and how, like, when he was talking about African Americans and how there is this ethnic racism that exists between, for example, Caribbean Black Americans or those of the African diaspora, and how they see each other. And I find that very similar, because I think that that of course happens within, like, for example, within the Arab community or within the Desi community in South Asians, where even we may be of, like, for example, with South Asians, if you know, you're essentially the same race, right? But then within South Asians, there's this ethnic racism that exists between, you know, the different countries or whatever, you know, region you're from, etc. And I found that parallel very interesting, right? That dynamic, because you know, it's something that's very relatable, and it actually reminds me how some of us also, you know, we're having these discussions about race. I think the uncomfortableness that sometimes arises is that, like, a feeling of, like, of guilt, right? Of collective guilt. So I know that when I speak to, like, for example, white Americans, and we talk about racism, there'll be white Americans who then they feel uncomfortable about it because, and they should not have to feel guilt for what other white Americans do, right? Because that's how you become, to be an anti-racist, right? It's about individualism. It's about individuals, you know, and what they do versus calling out an entire race and putting that responsibility of what some people from that race, you know, may do or say, and then just put it collective. And, you know, I find it interesting because there is so much parallels within our own Muslim community, whether you're talking about, and if I'm like a Bangladeshi American, and if I'm talking about certain things in regards to my experiences as a Bangladeshi, you know, someone, for example, some of my friends who are Pakistani will feel this, like, uncomfortableness, you know, about, you know, having these kinds of discussions. And it's just, well, you know, it's not about, you know, it's about no one's pinning you as your race as responsible for this or that. And when it happens within, like, you know, like Palestinians or Egyptians or you know, East African, you know, Somali or, you know, Sudanese, there's so many things, conversations that we have. And I think that it should allow us, and I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time with this, but I just feel like as within our Muslim community, this gives us an opportunity to have these difficult discussions and topics, and realize that, you know, we have to try as a community to become anti-racist, right? And follow that same kind of outline that was provided in this book, and then, you know, relate it to our community, and you know, help our community to reach a point of becoming anti-racist and collectively going towards that. So that's what I had to say.
I think,
Go ahead.
I was just going off of that. I think one of the things, it's like the idea of being anti-racist as a Muslim community, it's actually not awkward because it's in our deen. Like, right, it's in the Quran, like, it's in there that we should actively, you know, fight against injustice, even if it's from our own kin, you know, and stand with justice. So that's within our deen. But I think one of the things that are interesting is that, you know, the book does emphasize the fact that, you know, race is a social construct that was created throughout history for certain reasons, into dividing countries and into dividing regions and skin colors and all that, down basically to certain people of power wanting to keep their power. And I think as a Muslim community, that division that has happened and that has seeped through history, that for a lot of us is very hard for us to sort of come out of, even though our deen tells us to, right? Because it's been so easy for us to say, like, well, I am from this ethnicity and you're from that country, and so we have this bad blood between us, so we can't really talk about race and how to become anti-racist. And so I think that is something to kind of work towards, and especially as a community that is so diverse within America, it's important for us to start having these conversations, because a lot of times we end up imposing racial categories and ethnic categories on individuals who might be treating them differently if they don't identify the way they think they should. Like, you're not brown enough, you're not Somali enough, you're not Egyptian enough, or whatever it might be, because for some reason they think that you've assimilated. But that's still, you know, just that conversation. I think that's why it's important for us to kind of, at the core of this, it's actually part of our deen, but it's just we've been seeped with so much like history and cultures and so many different layers that it's hard to unshed those at times.
Yeah, Sister Amina, you brought up the term assimilation.
Amina.
Amina. Oh, I thought I said Amina in the beginning and I was wrong. My apologies.
No worries.
Okay, Sister Amina.
Yeah.
Yes, you brought up the term assimilationist, and I want to get into that question, like that fed in perfectly to another question we had for the group. But before I do that, I do want to reiterate that this is being recorded and it will be streamed later on, just so that everyone is aware of that. But everyone's doing great, honestly. So I'm loving the dialogue that's happening. So let's talk about one of the terms that's defined in the book, which is assimilationist. And I'm just going to read it out real quick. And that is one who is expressing the racist idea that a racial group is culturally or behaviorally inferior and is supporting cultural or behavioral enrichment programs to develop that racial group. And so the question that we want to pose to you is, how has assimilation left out racial groups from social acceptance? And so I want to start here with an example. We have some educators in the room. Shout out to our educators. One of these is about African American vernacular. So for example, a lot of kids will be talking in the classroom and they'll say, I'm finna go get a pencil. And then the teacher will correct them and saying, no, it's not finna, it's I'm going to get a pencil. And so even in that conversation, we see this form of assimilationism, right? Like what's considered proper language and what's considered improper. And we have to understand that there's dialects in English, right? There's dialects in any language. And we're placing a sort of superiority to a certain tone, to a certain type of language versus another. And so that's kind of one example of how certain racial groups can feel left out from that typical acceptance, from that social acceptance in America, and particularly Black people. So what does everyone think about this question and how people can be left out to assimilate? And, you know, this can also go into the immigrant context of like, you know, we're coming to the United States, we want to be accepted fully, even though we look like this, you know, and I don't know if we're ever going to be fully accepted, but it's about understanding we have a right to be here, that we want to contribute, and we want to make sure that, you know, equality happens everywhere. So yeah, go ahead. Anyone chime into this question?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Sorry, I haven't been really participating. My 3-year-old is still up and having a tantrum, so
Understood.
I didn't want to like make a lot of noise, but I think that was something that actually really struck me, because I remember back in like the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s, we were told that we're like a melting pot, like the US is a melting pot, and you kind of come in here and you become, you know, American. And then I remember growing up, it was always told that, oh, by 3rd generation, usually in the United States, you assimilate, and like most groups don't really keep their own distinct cultures anymore, and that's like you become like the fully American. And I always kind of felt that I didn't really think about it from the African American perspective at that time, but I always felt like it didn't apply to me or what I wanted for my generations. I wanted to be considered American, but having a Pakistani background, I still wanted to also be considered Pakistani and have that immigrant kind of, so it created kind of a tug of war inside of me. And I think that for a long time, you know, I had like imposter syndrome, honestly. Like I was just like, I feel like I don't really understand if I belong here or not. especially after 9/11. So, but I thought it was really interesting in the book how he kind of addresses that in a way, like even from the time of slavery and different African Americans who had this kind of like, oh, you know, we need to kind of be more American and have that so ingrained in them that they felt that inferiority. I can't even say that word. Anyway, complex. So it was like, I really thought it was interesting that he made that distinction in the book. And, you know, when I grew up in a mostly African-American area, like I went to a 90% African-American school, high school. Before that, I went to Islamic school. I never had any issues like being talked around. Ebonics was very normal in our area. But I can say I kind of felt like weirded by, you know, oh, why do they wear their clothes like that? Or like, what's up? Like, you know, the thug culture was thug, right? And it didn't have a positive connotation either. And being so close to the city, I mean, Baltimore City doesn't exactly have a great reputation. So I think like when people would find out, oh, I went to Woodlawn High School, which I don't know if anybody knows, but where that is, but it's like basically right, like a mile or two from the city. So we had a lot of students coming from the city as well. So when people found out that, oh, you go to that school, it would be like, oh, wow, that's not really the good school in this area.
Right.
So anyway, those are just some of my personal experiences and kind of like talking about assimilation and how I don't even think we have to even go. I think we can even talk about our own personal experiences and how assimilation has, you know, not necessarily affected us in a positive way.
Yeah. Sister, real quick, Hamza, Sister Tasnuva, did you want to add to that?
I think that when the discussion of assimilation, right, and the example that you gave, it allows for a lot of like microaggressions of communities, communities of color, and in regards to, you know, people outside of the American culture, right? So like immigrants, and you know, and I just think that educators also, you know, may not be aware. It could be, for example, in the book where, you know, the teacher is trying to correct, but then they doesn't realize that that just trying to correct in itself, that is like a microaggression against that person's personal experience or their culture or, you know, their language, etc. So I just wanted to put that up there.
Jazakallah khairan, everyone. Really good points, really good points. I think a lot of us have examples from our own personal experiences that we can bring up assimilation. And like the sister said, you know, I think it's a constant struggle within all of us, I think, where, you know, whether to assimilate and whether not to assimilate. So we're going to let these thoughts ruminate, you know, for everyone, and think about it a little bit more deeply when you get the chance, because I really do think this is a good topic. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to move on to the next question. I'm going to begin by bringing up a quote from the book, and then I'm going to lead into the question because they're both interconnected. Here's the quote from the book. "But crime bills have never correlated to crime any more than fear has correlated to actual violence. We are not meant to fear suits with policies that kill. We are not meant to fear good white males with AR-15s. No, we are to fear the wary, unarmed Latinx body from Latin America. The Arab body kneeling to Allah is to be feared. The Black body from hell is to be feared. Adept politicians and crime entrepreneurs manufacture the fear and stand before voters to deliver them. Messiahs who will liberate them from fear of these other bodies." So there's the quote. And so the question is, do we live in fear of the other? And can we think as a group of life experiences where this fear was rooted in racism? So this is when we want other people to start sharing and maybe bring up some examples.
I think absolutely. I think one of the ways that power is able to continue is through maintaining fear. Even in like the stories of the Quran, like you'll see that, like for example, Pharaoh, he was able to maintain his tyranny because he was able to maintain fear. And I think that's one of the things that we definitely have in the society, is that we are taught to fear each other, and we are taught to fear differences. And like for example, I was in middle school when 9/11 happened, and that day I was asked if I was going to bomb the school as a 12-year-old. And I think at that time it was just because I was different. I grew up in that city. I was always with those kids in public school since kindergarten. But because of that one event and because of the way it was framed in the media, that very day I was asked, a question like that. So I think it's definitely there, and I think it's definitely something that even exists within our community, is that we are taught at times to fear differences, and we are taught to kind of be wary of the other. And I think that's a big way that racism has been able to continue to be perpetuated.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right with that fear concept. I also experienced that in school. Like anytime 9/11 came up, boom, eyes to me. And I'm like, I don't represent these people. Why are the eyes to me? I mean, I think a lot of us here can relate to that. But I want us to think more critically in terms of fear that people have towards Black people, specifically Black men. So, for example, I work in the criminal justice system, and I work with public defenders. And a lot of my clients will talk about how when white people walk by them, they grip their purse, or they get scared, or they look the other way. They walk faster. So these are also the kinds of fear that we're talking about in this question. And also, it's important to understand that these fears are not rational, because like if you think more about the statistics, Black people are not more likely to commit crime than white people. They're just more heavily policed, and that's a part of the racist policies that exist. Even in Connecticut, I think Black adults are 9 times more likely to be incarcerated than white adults for the same offense. So, it's ingrained in how our justice system operates, and that's just one example. And, Hamza brought up the point of capitalism and how that impacts how people are treated in the racist policies that are perpetuated. So let's think more critically about these examples. I really appreciate everyone's input and how people have been really vulnerable, sharing like, yeah, I have these biases, because that's the first step. Like this is what the book is meant to do, to have us reflect. So what other examples can we think of in terms of that fear?
I can bring up a quick example, Hannah.
Go ahead.
So, this is an open discussion, right? And so being a little bit vulnerable, like Hannah said, is, we appreciate that. And I might say something that's kind of a little bit vulnerable, but it's just something that I came through a little bit of self-reflecting. And in the past, my mom has always raised me to be homeschooled. And alhamdulillah, it's been blessings in many ways. But one of the blessings has been that I haven't had to deal with some of the race problems that other people might, deal with in schools, right? But one thing that did affect me dramatically is I realized that when I was younger, I used to self-discriminate against myself. And I didn't like the fact that I was Black. And to add on top of that, subhanAllah, I remember I would be walking in the streets, and I would be scared. I'd be walking maybe, past a group of Black men or Black teenagers. And I remember I used to have that sort of fear inside of me. And I used to wonder like, oh, what is that person gonna do? And I've spent a lot of self-reflection on this specifically. But yeah, I have to admit it, that I was feeding into this racism, and it was rooted in fear, that I was scared of other Black people when I used to go out in public spaces. But what I failed to realize is the way how I viewed maybe other Black people are the ways that other people are going to view me, you know?
Right.
And so when I go outside of public space, one thing that I have to be very conscious of is the way how I conduct myself, the way how I conduct myself in general. I used to remember when I was younger, I used to wear a hoodie over my head like all the time because I just used to be cold naturally. And my dad used to always tell me, Hamza, take the hoodie off of your head. And I was so confused. I was like, why? You know, why would you want me to take this hoodie off of my head? But, you know, my dad understood because, you know, he kind of grew up in that culture. And that a lot of this racism is rooted in fear. And like Hannah said, I guess we want to kind of shift the discussion towards talking about race from this aspect. And we want people to share experiences maybe specifically with Black people, but, you know, in regards to race exactly. Because, you know, fear is an emotion that I think drives us to do, you know, a lot of stupid things. You know, that's one of the reasons why there's so much police brutality, is because, you know, a white police officer sees this Black man, even though they're unarmed, like the quote was saying from the book, but for some reason they feel more fear when they're trying to apprehend a Black person. And because of that, they would be more inclined to, you know, do something rash, like shoot them. And so I just want to, you know, bring up my personal life experience and push people to share their life experiences from this specific point.
I have something I can share. I was kind of reflecting recently, and I realized that I don't really attend inner city masajid. And I realize it's because, like, of the fear of actually having to go into the inner city, despite the fact that people live there and Muslims go there, and most of them are Black Muslims. I have just not really put myself in that position to go into massages into the inner city, and that's one thing that I recently kind of reflected on. Another thing is, a few years ago, I took a course at the Community College of Baltimore County on culture responsive teaching. So we had one of our assignments was to do implicit bias test from the Harvard University test that they have on implicit bias, and it showed that I had a bias towards African American men. And I remember this one time I was sitting down at on a sidewalk with my nephew, and I had it was like a wallet, it was placed behind me, and I saw these two Black men walking down the sidewalk, and as soon as I saw them, I took the wallet and put it in front of me. And one of the guys actually stopped and said to me, "Miss, you didn't have to do that. I wouldn't have stolen your wallet. In fact, if someone had taken it, I would have stopped them." And I was so embarrassed because it was something that I didn't even think about that I did, but the person noticed me doing it and called me out on it, called me on that. So that was a very eye-opening moment for me because it wasn't something that I thought about, but it was definitely noticed by the African American man that walked by.
Jazakallah khairan for bringing that example. You know, we appreciate this. You know, it does take, like I said, a bit of vulnerability to share something like this, but I want you to understand that, you know, you're not alone. Like, this is something that a lot of people deal with. And just one thing that, you know, we can think about, and I'm going to lead into the next question, is how many times have you walked past a Black person and nothing happened? You know, the media is always centered around glorifying the violence, right? You know, when we look at the media, for example, you know, we only see the bad in this world, you know, and it's just when you compare the ratio between violent things that may have happened and, you know, these peaceful altercations where, you know, you walk past a Black person, nothing happened. It's just something to consider, that the percentage of, you know, the percentage of something like that happening is much lower than we think it is. We just we kind of dramatize it in our heads a little bit. So this is just something for everyone to think about. So the next question that I want to ask you guys is, are we welcoming of Black Muslims in our masajids? And if not, what can we do to be more welcoming?
So that's a really important question to ask. And I think Sister Shima, introduced this very well with how she was like talking about masajid in inner cities and are they very well visited. I also want us to think about the kind of partnerships that different mosques do. Are we reaching out to the mosques at inner cities to be in those partnerships? I'll personally say I don't see that happening. And I'll personally say that even growing up, going to masajids, I always noticed that our Black sisters and brothers would always be in a corner alone while everyone else was congregating and talking. And, they're friend groups. Everyone has their own friends. Everyone will, talk to who they know. But there does come a point when there are people being siloed, and that we as Muslims need to take an active role, that anti-racist role, to make sure everyone is feeling included. So something that I've done is I always make it a point to talk to everyone that I see alone in the masjid, even if they're not Black, but particularly if they are, because I don't ever want them to feel like, these people aren't coming up to me because I'm Black. They think I'm a convert automatically. Not every Black person is a convert. The reason why Islam exists in America is because of Black Muslims. So, these are the kinds of things that we want to bring up in the conversation in this very important question that Hamza asked. And so even to add another part of it, how can we be more welcoming of Black Muslims in our space? Because the fact is, I've spoken to a lot of my Black Muslim women friends, and they're like, yeah, when I walk into a masjid, like, no one comes up and talks to me. Like, I don't feel welcome there. And so those are their experiences. What can we do, particularly as non-Black folks in the room?
I would say, so when it comes to defend ourselves or what we want or what we want to do, we are actively advocating. But when we see other people suffering or other people are not being included, we just claim to be neutral. So getting rid of this neutrality and taking actively part into spreading the awareness, spreading peace and love among people, acceptance, I believe would help.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just one thing. Oh, sorry, did I cut someone off?
No. I just turned it back on.
Okay. Well, I'm going to add something really brief. It should take 10 seconds. Just one thing that we want to keep in mind is that if we are not actively taking the role to, help those, particularly maybe Black Muslims who are feeling secluded, then that can fall into racism if we look at the definition that the author brings up. And so we just need to be mindful of, what does being a racist and what does being an anti-racist entail? If we're not doing something and we're not doing anything at all, then we can be classified as racist.
Excellent point, Hamza. Really great addition to that conversation.
Also, like this,
when you're
the 3-year-olds joining our conversation, mashallah. I'm happy to have them.
Also, especially like, during the month of Ramadan, in our masjid, like there are people from different, countries in different ethnic background. They come and they join us, especially during Ramadan. And the one thing you can do is like you sit with your family and your close friend all the time. One thing could be just go and sit with them, talk. I mean, people love to talk. And some people sometimes don't have people to talk to, or like, especially who are new to our religion, it's a good thing that, you don't want them to be feeling frustrated because, we came to this religion and now we are isolated and we do not have anybody to kind of lean on kind of feeling. We don't want them to feel frustrated. I mean, it's a good idea to go and sit down, talk to them. We have so much thing to talk about in this world. So without kind of, putting somebody down.
I actually wanted to add something that, and I've tried to do this within my masjid, for a while, but I think it's imperative now, and maybe masjid board members really need to listen in and actually push this narrative as American Muslims. in our American Muslim masjids, we really need to drive that narrative of the first American Muslims in this country, and and they are descendants of African slaves, and what they actually did to build this country. We don't like our Desi masjids, Arab masjids, whatever different masjids. Are we promoting during not just Black History Month, right? Are we even doing a Black History Month, right? Are we playing some kind of tribute? Are we in our khatibs like talking about the just the Black
contribution,
the contributions and the Black American history, right? The Muslim history in this country. So I think that it's important that as American Muslims that, and now with newer generations, really push that narrative to go back to our roots as within America, where that history, the starting point was. And we really need to connect to that and discuss that and really push that narrative within our masjid walls.
And one thing just to add to that I think we really need to be aware of is, when people create messages, definitely like it starts from the beginning when it comes to these cliques and these nationality things. Like I know around me, I can name like an Egyptian masjid, right? A Pakistani masjid, right? And it's like you look at the board members, for example, and it's all comprised of people, within like one nationality, right? And so these are serious questions that we need to be asking ourselves and changing it so that we can create a more diverse culture and, people with different races. And yeah, that's really what I want to add. So
yes, I just would like to add to what you said, categorizing masajid. I have been teaching in different masjids. Those are belong to different nations and different tribes. What I see is not only it's limited to adults, also for child. So for masjids who are only for Arabs, their schedule look like, okay, that they are only teaching like Arabs. They're doing it just because the majority of students are Arab. So, okay, now that you think the majority of students are Arab and you design your schedule like that, how can a non-Arab would come there if they don't find any space for them, any schedule for them? So at least I always organize my classes in a way that everybody can participate. So what I'm saying is like in an individual level, if everybody start doing what they can do, things would change.
Yeah.
I think in some ways that, I work in a public school, and anyone who's working, most of you all are working as young adults and, adults out there. I always wonder, like, the transparency that, when you work outside your home with other people, there's that transparency that you feel in your workplace. Sometimes I don't feel the same in the masjid, like, this is very sad. These are the same people who also have the full-time job outside that, masjid role, whatever they have, but it's very hard to see the transparency. I think there's something we all need to work on.
I would say in addition that one way is, I was mentioning the inner city masajids, but monetarily supporting those masajids and organizations that are run by our African American brothers and sisters in our community.
Yeah.
I think another thing also to keep in mind is that within the greater society, the dominant narrative is that of, being white, right? But if we look within the dominant masajid, or the larger masajid, the dominant narrative is in there tends to be the brown immigrant, whether it's South Asian or Arab, right? And so if we happen to fall under one of these categories, we're actually automatically somewhat privileged the minute we walk into those masajids. And I think if we recognize that we have some form of privilege, and we use that privilege to help elevate the voices of our Black, brown brothers, not that we talk for them, because I think we're done doing that, and I think we should stop doing that. But I think at some point, if we are in a position that we do have some privilege, then we should use it to help our Black brothers and sisters bring their stories, bring their narratives, come to the forefront, and to be part of our communities and not for us to be separated. Because I think that's really important, because sometimes, at times we don't choose our privileges, but we choose how to use them. And I think that's one thing that we have to keep in mind.
Jazakallah khair.
Yeah.
If I could just answer your original question. I think instead of trying to eradicate racism within our masjids and communities, I think it would be better to start off with our own families first, within our own households, because I think like a majority of Muslims in the United States, I think a majority are immigrants, and we all come with our own cultural aspects too, which also can be very, very racist as well. So I think handling them in our own households, it would carry on into our communities and masjids as well.
That's such a good
I
point.
agree. Yep.
That's such a good point, because I just want you guys to understand that if everyone takes the time to work on themselves and to work on their inner circle of people, whether that's their family or their friends, if everyone does that, then that in and of itself could eradicate racism. So like Huzaifa said, the first step is to look at racism within our inner circle of things. But once you do that, that's only the first step, We want to take the next step and start becoming an anti-racist, because this conversation is only going to be impactful if we do something after this conversation, Like this is a good conversation and everything, but if it stops here, then there really is, we're mitigating the benefit that we could be getting. And so that's the point that I want to bring up, Like everyone needs to do the work to really truly becoming an anti-racist and not just stopping at, I'm not a racist. And I think Hannah is gonna follow up, inshallah.
Yeah, definitely great segue, Hamza. And that leads us to our final question in our last 5 minutes here today, which is, what can we do daily to be actively anti-racist? If everyone, can just share a suggestion, keep it brief. We have 5 minutes left, but just share something that the group can do. And we just heard a great one, which is to dismantle it in our families. And a big part of that is calling it out. And even calling out microaggressions. Like in my job the other day, someone was talking about my Black coworker and her hair. And they were saying like, oh, why aren't you on camera? And she's like, well, my hair's not done. And they're like, can't you just put it up? And I'm like, that's a microaggression. And I called and I unmuted myself and I was like, actually, she probably has a lot more to do than you think. So let's just let it be. And then that was it. Like that was me calling it out and like, boom, they're not going to bring that up again. So that's an example of what we can do daily. Anyone else have something to chime in with?
I would say talk to someone who is different than you every day, someone different when it comes to religion, culture, race, and just, spark conversation. It can be about anything, just every single day, at least once a day. I think that'd be a good goal.
This is the educator in me, but I would say educate ourselves, honestly. Just learn about different people, learn from different people, read about what's going on, listen if you don't like to read, watch if you don't like to listen, like whatever it is, just find a way to continue to educate ourselves, because if we don't, then we're just going to keep perpetuating whatever we're doing.
I say be mindful of what you're saying to others and how you're perceiving, even your body language, the gesture, everything counts. So kind of be mindful of what you're saying. Be kind.
Definitely.
Very powerful.
I would say participate in their events. Go to their events, talk to them, learn from what they have unique. Because this differences, I believe, is the beauty in the world. So as much as we see, and we understand, we become more accepting. So I believe to accept others, it's better to learn about them.
Educate yourself again.
And
have empathy.
Yeah, very good points from all of you guys. One small thing that I would add is to be comfortable with taking yourself out of your comfort zone and calling out racism within yourself and calling out racist behaviors with other people. But we just have to be mindful that when we correct someone, we want to do it in the best manner possible. we know that just the word racism is a very hot button
Exactly.
word, right? And so people are automatically going to get defensive if you call them out and say, look, that's racist. So just like what Hannah, you know, the example that she gave, that was very intuitive because she brought it up, but not in a way that's explicitly pointing at the other person, you know? And, you know, we just have to understand that, and this is a really important topic that the author explains, is that we are either anti-racist or racist depending on the next choice that we make. You know, every decision that you make is going to fall within those categories. And we just want to try to do our best to consistently make decisions that are upholding anti-racist behavior so that we can try our best to remain an anti-racist.
Lovely. Yeah. And that's a great note to end on. One final thing I'll say is follow up with your elected officials to make sure that racist policies don't continue to be put in place, and to correct the racist policies that exist. So that's going to require research on our end, but opening that communication with our elected officials and holding them accountable to dismantling racist policies is huge for us to do collectively. So we are at our end time today. Jazakallah khair, everyone, for engaging in our discussion, for all the beautiful additions that we've made here. I've learned, I feel like I've grown just listening to everyone's perspectives, and inshallah you have too. We would like to announce our book for next month, which is my favorite book of all time, y'all. Please, I hope you enjoy this book. It's The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. This book is what inspired me to get into criminal justice work. So please grab that book. Hamza and I are going to work on seeing if there's a way to get it online for free. We'll work on that. If not, order it, and inshallah, you know, we'll send in updates in the chat, and you can go ahead and ask Hamza and I if you have any questions. We've also made a list of future books to be released, so that is also available to you. That flyer's in the group chat. And so again, we want to thank everyone for joining today. And so grab that next book, and we'll see you in the next discussion next month.
Thank you. Thank you for
All right. Thank you very
everyone.
much, everybody. That was a good discussion.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.